My name is Sarah, I'm 42, and just months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. But the day I inherited $11 million, everything I believed about love and loyalty collapsed. My husband walked out on me when I needed him most, and what came next was something I never could have imagined. Before I tell you the whole story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more family betrayal and emotional courage stories. I never imagined my world could collapse in a single day, but that's exactly what happened. I still remember the smell of the hospital room, a mixture of antiseptic and something sharp that stung my nose. The beeping machines reminded me I was still alive, though I wasn't sure if I felt lucky about that. My body ached in ways I didn't think possible. My left leg was bandaged, my ribs burned every time I breathed, and a dull throb behind my eyes refused to let me forget the accident. But none of that compared to the pain of realizing I was alone. The first time I opened my eyes, I whispered one word, Mark. My husband's name. I expected him to be there, maybe slumped in a chair by my bed, holding my hand, whispering that everything would be okay. But the chair was empty. The hand I reached for never came. Where's my husband? I asked the nurse, my throat dry and voice cracked. She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. He hasn't been here, sweetheart, she said softly, like she was breaking bad news about someone else. Not once. Not once. The words echoed in my head. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe he had just stepped out, maybe he didn't get the call, maybe he was at work trying to manage bills. That's what I told myself at first. But hours turned into days. Meals came and went, pain medicine numbed my body, but Mark never showed. When the phone by my bed finally connected to his number, my heart raced. He answered on the third ring. Mark. I whispered, desperate. There was a pause, then his voice came, distant, cold. Sarah, I can't do this anymore. Can't do what? My hand gripped the thin hospital blanket, knuckles white. This, he snapped. Taking care of you, waiting around. I'm done. Tears blurred my vision. I almost died. You haven't even been here. His reply cut deeper than any injury. You're on your own now. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. My body shook, not from pain, but from betrayal. The man I had given 20 years of my life to had abandoned me the moment I needed him most. I closed my eyes, memories of us flooding in like cruel reminders. Our wedding day in a small church in Indiana, his trembling hands as he slipped the ring on my finger. The night we moved into our first apartment, eating cold pizza on the floor because we didn't own furniture yet. The way he promised we'd always be a team. Where had that man gone? As I lay there, my mind drifted to the papers I had signed just before the accident. My late uncle had left me his estate, an inheritance worth $11 million. It was surreal, the kind of thing you hear about but never expect to happen to someone like me. I hadn't even told Mark yet. I wanted it to be a surprise, a blessing we could share. I thought it would finally ease the financial stress that had been eating at us for years. But now, the irony was cruel. He walked away before he even knew. The nurse came in later, adjusting my four, and asked gently, "Do you have anyone else we can call? Family?" I shook my head. My parents had passed years ago. My sister lived across the country, barely in touch. Mark was supposed to be my family. But he had vanished. That night, I couldn't sleep. The machines hummed, shadows stretched across the sterile walls, and loneliness pressed against me like a heavy blanket. I thought about the accident. One minute, I was driving home from the lawyer's office, the inheritance papers tucked neatly in my bag. The next, a truck swerved, lights blinding me, and everything went dark. I woke up 2 days later to a new reality, not just broken bones, but a broken marriage. The hospital became my prison. I listened to the distant laughter of other patients' visitors, the clink of coffee cups from the nurse's station, the low hum of televisions from other rooms. But for me, there was silence. On the third day, I overheard 2 nurses talking in the hallway. "Isn't it strange?" one whispered. "Her husband hasn't even stopped by." "Strange," the other replied. "It's shameful. She deserves better." I turned my face toward the window, pretending I couldn't hear, but every word pierced me. By the end of the week, I was released. A taxi took me home because Mark never offered. As the cab pulled into our driveway, I froze. His car wasn't there, but signs of absence were. The blinds in the living room were drawn shut, the porch light that he always left on for me was dark, and the mailbox overflowed with flyers. Inside, it was worse. His clothes were gone. His toothbrush missing. Drawers emptied. It was like he had erased himself overnight. I stumbled into the bedroom, pain shooting through my leg, and collapsed onto the bed. On the nightstand, I found a note. 2 sentences in his rushed handwriting. Sarah, I can't be tied down anymore. Don't look for me. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. 20 years reduced to a scrap of paper. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the papers about my inheritance still tucked in my bag. I wanted to laugh and cry all at once. If only he had waited a few days, if only he had stood by me just a little longer, he would have known. But maybe that was the blessing. Maybe it was better he left before he could sink his claws into what was mine. Still, the betrayal burned. I wasn't ready to think about revenge or money. I just wanted to breathe without the weight crushing my chest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself, I'll survive this. Somehow, I'll survive. And deep inside, a spark flickered. It wasn't hope yet, not fully, but it was the first sign of strength returning. The day my life shattered was also the day I began to rebuild, even if I didn't know it yet. The spark I felt didn't roar into a fire. It warmed me just enough to swing my legs over the side of the bed and plant my feet on the floor. Morning light pushed through the blinds in thin, stubborn lines. I opened them wide, let the room fill, and took my first steady breath without measuring it against pain. I made coffee the way I always had, 2 scoops, slow pour, no hurry. The pot gurgled like an old friend. I cradled the mug, felt the heat in my palms, and told myself I could do one small thing at a time. Shower. Dress. Brush hair. No grand plans. Just movement. Mail waited in a crooked stack on the entry table. I sorted through coupons, a church newsletter, and a postcard from my sister that said, in her careful script, thinking of you. Underneath, a handwritten envelope carried no return address. Inside, a reminder from the law office about final signatures. I slid the paper back into its sleeve and tucked it in the kitchen drawer beside the warranty manuals. I wasn't ready to think about documents or numbers. Not yet. The doorbell rang. I balanced my weight and shuffled to the porch. Mrs. Keene, our neighbor with the tidy hydrangeas, stood there holding a covered dish and a worried smile. Hi, honey. Baked ziti, she said, lifting the foil. Figured you could use something easy. I blinked back a rush of gratitude. Thank you. That's kind. Her gaze flicked over my shoulder into the hollow house. You managing okay? I'm trying. She nodded, then fidgeted with the strap of her tote. I saw Mark yesterday, she said softly. He was loading a lawn mower into a truck. He wasn't alone. Air thinned. Oh. A woman, she added, almost apologizing for the detail. Dark hair. I didn't recognize her. They drove off toward Maple Ridge, I think. Thank you for telling me. My voice was steady, and I surprised myself. Mrs. Keene squeezed my arm. You call if you need a ride or anything. Don't be proud. After she left, I set the ziti in the fridge, leaned on the counter, and listened to the quiet tick of the kitchen clock. The house had a new echo, a sound that revealed every empty drawer and missing jacket. I walked through each room anyhow, reclaiming what was left. I folded the blanket on the couch. I made the bed with crisp corners the way my mother taught me. I emptied the trash cans, because the smell of old coffee grounds and paper wrappers put a weight in my throat. By afternoon, I needed fresh air. The grocery store on Oak Street was a short drive if I went slow. I eased the car out of the driveway like it could bruise, kept to the right lane, and let people pass without apology. In the parking lot, I waited until the nearest space cleared, then took it, grateful not to wrestle with distance. Inside, the store was its usual Saturday self, kids tugging cart handles, a teenage employee lining up apples like marbles, a man humming along to the faint radio. Normalcy folded around me like a blanket I didn't know I missed. I moved slowly, collecting bread, bananas, soup, and a small bouquet of daisies. I wanted living color on the table. At the dairy case, I saw him. Mark's profile, familiar as my own reflection, appeared in the cool glass. He stood at the yogurt, reading labels like something important lived there. A woman hovered at his elbow, a canvas tote looped over her shoulder. Dark hair. Soft sweater. She rested a hand against her stomach and turned her face away as if the light were too bright. My first instinct was to turn and run. Instead, I steadied the cart and reminded myself I had more right to be in this aisle than either of them. I stepped forward. Mark. My voice didn't shake. He looked over, eyes skating fast from my face to my bandaged leg and back. Sarah. He said my name like an inconvenience. The woman shifted. Up close, her features were plain in the way of someone who doesn't try too hard, clear skin, serious mouth, eyes that lifted then dropped as if touching mine burned. I'm glad you're upright, Mark said. You look functional. Functional, I repeated, almost amused. That's a generous word. He smirked, the expression I used to mistake for charm. You should take it easy. You don't need to be out doing all this. He gestured, a circle that took in groceries, people, and the entire idea of my independence. The woman finally spoke, a small voice. We should go. 1 minute, Mark told her, then to me, there's no reason to make this complicated. I didn't say anything, I replied. I came for milk. He chuckled, short and unkind. Always practical. The woman's gaze brushed mine again, and something like recognition flickered there, quick, startled, gone. She tugged his sleeve. Please. Mark lifted the basket and turned. Take care, Sarah. They left, shoulders close, heads bent together. I stood in the cold air of the dairy case and let my hands warm around the cart handle. A small boy nearby dropped a pack of string cheese and giggled when it bounced. Life, relentless, kept moving. At checkout, the cashier, a young woman with chipped Polish and kind eyes, scanned my items. Short day, she asked. Trying to make it one, I said. She glanced toward the exit, where Mark and the woman disappeared into sunlight. They come in a lot lately, she murmured, almost to herself. Then she brightened, caught herself, and handed me my receipt. You have a good afternoon, I carried the groceries into the house in 2 trips, sat at the kitchen table, and trimmed the daisies to fit the old blue jar. Their stems clicked against the glass. I set the jar in the center like a tiny promise. Then I opened a notebook from the drawer and wrote 3 lines: eat, walk, call the clinic. The clinic answered on the 2nd ring. Physical therapy, this is Lana. Hi, I said, my name is Sarah. I was in an accident 2 weeks ago. I'd like to schedule an evaluation. Of course, she replied, efficient but warm. Can you do Monday at 9? Bring comfortable shoes and patience. I can do shoes, I said. Patience is new. She laughed. We'll practice both. Sunday came with rain. I let it fall, a steady drumming on the porch roof that calmed me better than sleep had. I made a simple breakfast, emailed my boss at the town library to confirm medical leave, and swept the kitchen floor even though it didn't need it. Motion soothed. Mid-morning, I eased onto the couch with a heating pad and the TV on low. A commercial for a hardware store flashed across the screen, and I saw our old lawn mower model, the handle scuffed where Mark's wedding ring used to shine. I clicked the volume down and closed my eyes. By afternoon, the rain loosened into mist. I stepped onto the porch and saw Mr. Barber from 2 houses down walking his terrier. He lifted a hand. Afternoon, Sarah. You hanging in there? I am, I said. One day at a time. He nodded, then lowered his voice. Saw your fella over at Maple Ridge last night. Carrying in a TV with a lady. Looked like they were settling in. Thanks, I said, keeping my face neutral. The last thing I needed was pity turning into a neighborhood hobby. That evening I made a plate of Mrs. Keen's ziti, ate half, covered the rest, and washed the fork. I turned off lights one by one, letting the house darken gently, not like a switch, but like a curtain. In bed, I listened to the quiet. It sounded less like emptiness and more like space I could grow into if I was careful. Monday, I drove to the clinic with both hands at 10 and 2. Lana met me in the waiting room, a woman in her 30s with a practical ponytail and sneakers that squeaked when she walked. "Sarah," she asked. "Come on back." She measured my steps, my balance, my range of motion. "Good foundation," she said, jotting notes. "Your body wants to help you. Let's not argue with it." We practiced simple exercises. Lift. Hold. Release. My leg trembled and then surprised me by steadying. Sweat collected at my hairline. "I feel ridiculous," I said, half laughing, half winded. "You feel human," Lana replied. "That's the whole point." In the lobby, while I scheduled the next appointment, a TV on the wall ran local news. A reporter stood in front of Maple Ridge Apartments, talking about a water main break that had displaced several residents. I glanced up, then away, annoyed at coincidence for crowding my morning. I took my appointment card and a peppermint from the dish. On the drive home, I turned down the street that curved behind Maple Ridge. I told myself it was because of the roadwork signs on the main route. The truth sat beside me, silent but honest. I wanted to know where he'd landed. The complex looked ordinary: beige siding, thin trees, a playground with a bright slide. Near Building C, I recognized Mark's blue pickup. The passenger seat held a canvas tote like the one I'd seen at the store. A couple carried a rug across the parking lot and laughed when it sagged in the middle. I kept driving, slow and anonymous, and exited onto the next block. I didn't park. I didn't get out. I didn't need a scene. I had enough of those in my head. Back home, I made tea and opened the back door to let in crisp air. The neighbor's wind chimes tinkled, a sound I used to ignore. Now it felt like company. I folded laundry into neat stacks and set a pair of Mark's old socks aside for donation. They weren't mine to keep, even if he'd forgotten they existed. Around 4, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Is the grill still in the shed?" For a second, I almost answered, thinking it was a neighbor. Then the next message arrived: "We'll stop by at 6. Need it tonight." A photo followed of Mark's truck. I stared at the screen until the messages turned from words into shapes. I typed, "Wrong number," deleted it, and set the phone face down on the table. At 5:30, I locked the back gate. 6 came and went without visitors. Maybe he remembered the spare key I'd moved. Maybe he decided to borrow someone else's. Either way, the quiet stayed mine. Just after dusk, I heard voices in the alley. Laughter, then footsteps, then the scrape of something against concrete. I looked through the blinds. 2 teenagers from down the block were dragging an old chair toward the curb, leaving a trail of dust. Not Mark. Not anyone I needed to brace for. I turned on the porch light and sat on the top step with a blanket over my knees. The evening smelled like cut grass and distant barbecue. A car door thudded somewhere, and a radio played a soft oldies station. Behind me, the house settled, tiny clicks and sighs as if it were exhaling. I thought about the woman at the store. The way her eyes met mine and then fled. The way her hand rested against her stomach. None of it told me who she was. It told me only that she was there, occupying space where I used to stand. A stranger in a life I had helped build. I let that thought sit beside me like a guest I didn't invite. It wasn't welcome, but it was real. I went inside, washed my face, and wrote in my notebook, "Practice. Protect peace. No scenes." Then, because the words felt small, I added one more line: "I still get to choose who I am." Before bed, I moved the blue jar of daisies to the nightstand. Their petals had opened wider since morning, creamy centers facing the room like little suns. I switched off the lamp and let the dark come slowly. Sleep found me without a chase. The next morning, I woke with less fear in my throat. I brewed coffee, laced up sneakers, and walked the block, just once, past Mrs. Keene's hydrangeas, Mr. Barber's overgrown ivy, and the little free library box with its peeling paint. A sparrow hopped along the sidewalk in front of me like a tiny guide. When I reached my porch again, I felt a thread of pride pull through me like a stitch. Inside, I checked the notebook and read yesterday's lines. They still felt right. I added another, let them think I'm broken if it keeps them away. Then I closed the cover and pressed my palm flat against it, as if to seal the words in. The silence in the house felt heavier that evening than it ever had before. After the earlier confrontation with Daniel and the surreal experience of finding a stranger living where I once belonged, I couldn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind raced. I sat at the edge of the bed in the guest room, staring at the cracks on the ceiling, wondering how everything I thought I knew about my life had turned out to be an illusion. When the clock hit 2 a.m., I finally gave up on trying to rest. I grabbed the small lamp by the bedside and pulled Daniel's old laptop from the closet. He hadn't taken it with him when he moved out, it was buried under old sweaters, as if he didn't care whether I found it or not. I powered it on, my palms clammy, half expecting it to ask for a password I wouldn't know. But it didn't. His familiar login screen appeared, the same background picture of us at the beach from 5 years ago staring back at me. Something about that image made my stomach twist. His arm was around me, his smile wide, yet now I wondered if even then, he'd already been hiding something. I clicked into his email. Hundreds of unread messages popped up, but one folder caught my eye. It was labeled work travel, which made sense, Daniel often traveled for conferences. But inside, instead of hotel confirmations and itineraries, there were long email chains with a woman named Claire. My chest tightened. The subject lines weren't about work at all, they were coded, strange phrases like blue skies ahead or dinner at the usual spot. I clicked one open. Can't wait to see you again. She has no idea. Our secret is safe. My hands trembled as I scrolled further. Message after message revealed late-night meetups, hidden gifts, even plans for a vacation I'd never known about. He'd been carrying on a double life, not just sneaking around but weaving a whole existence that excluded me entirely. I pushed the laptop away, my stomach lurching. How long had this been going on? Had he been lying to me even before our wedding day? The next morning, I couldn't shake the need for proof beyond digital messages. I tore through the drawers in the office, the ones he used to lock. To my surprise, the key was still taped under the desk. With shaking hands, I unlocked them. Inside were envelopes stuffed with receipts. Jewelry stores, expensive dinners, hotel stays, all during weekends he claimed to be on business trips. But what stunned me most was a lease agreement. Daniel had been paying rent on an apartment downtown. An apartment I never knew existed. My mind spun. The betrayal wasn't just about love anymore, it was about deception at every level. He had lived like a man split in two, husband to me in the daylight, but someone else entirely in the shadows. I decided I needed to see this place with my own eyes. That afternoon, I drove to the address listed on the lease. It was a modest brick building, nothing fancy, but neat enough to blend into the city's rhythm. My hands shook as I rang the buzzer, not knowing who or what I'd find inside. To my shock, a middle-aged man opened the door. Looking for Claire, he asked casually, as though this happened often. My throat dried up. I managed to nod, and he gestured upstairs. Second floor. She's usually home around this time. The idea of facing her made my knees weak. Still, I climbed the stairs, each creak of the wooden steps echoing like a warning. I stopped in front of the door labeled 2B. For a long moment, I just stood there, hand raised, unable to knock. Finally, I forced myself to tap lightly. The door opened almost instantly. A woman with auburn hair and sharp green eyes stood before me. She looked me up and down, her face stiffening with recognition. "You must be Anna," she said flatly. My heart stopped. She knew my name. She knew me. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "And you're Claire?" She crossed her arms, leaning on the doorframe as though she'd been expecting this moment for years. "He promised he'd tell you eventually. But I guess cowards never do." Her words cut like glass. I felt my knees weaken again, but I held my ground. "How long?" I asked, my voice trembling. Her eyes narrowed. "Almost 6 years. Longer than your marriage." The world tilted under me. 6 years. That meant he had been with her before he even proposed to me. Everything, the vows, the anniversaries, the little surprises, had been a performance, a cover-up for the truth of his double life. Claire sighed, looking almost sympathetic. "You weren't supposed to find out like this. But now you know." He wanted both worlds, and he thought he could keep them separate forever. I staggered back, unable to breathe. The air in that hallway felt poisonous. Without another word, I turned and hurried down the stairs, each step pounding like a drum in my chest. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel, shaking uncontrollably. My life had just fractured into even smaller pieces. It wasn't just betrayal, it was years of living inside a lie so carefully constructed that I'd never seen the cracks until now. As I sat there, memories flooded back with new meaning. His late nights at the office. The unexplained charges on our joint card. The sudden business trips. Each one was no longer an innocent excuse, they were fragments of his hidden truth, signs I had ignored because I trusted him too much. I cried until my throat burned. But beneath the pain, a new feeling stirred: anger. If Daniel thought he could erase me from his life and replace me with someone else, he was wrong. The inheritance he never expected me to get had shifted the balance. For the first time, I had the power. And I knew then that uncovering the rest of his secrets was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire's face at the apartment door, her cold green eyes cutting into me as she revealed the truth that Daniel had been living a double life long before I even said I do. Her words replayed in my head like a cruel chant: 6 years, longer than your marriage. The anger that had started in my chest earlier that day only grew heavier. My mind was buzzing, a storm of betrayal, disbelief, and fury. I didn't know what to do with it. I paced the living room until dawn, the floorboards creaking beneath my restless steps. When the morning light finally seeped through the blinds, I made up my mind. If Daniel thought he could erase me, replace me, and keep building his little fantasy life, he was wrong. I needed to face him, not just in emails, not through whispers in the hallway of a stranger's apartment, but face to face. I learned from one of the receipts that he and Claire sometimes went to a small restaurant near the city square. I waited until evening, when I knew there was a chance he'd show. My stomach churned as I sat in my car across the street, watching people go in and out. Every couple that passed made my chest tighten, but then, there he was. Daniel. He looked the same and yet so different. His shirt was crisp, his tie neatly knotted, his arm draped casually around a woman I recognized instantly, not Claire. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the woman from the apartment. This was someone else entirely. I couldn't believe my eyes. How many lives was he living? How many women had he tangled in his web? I followed them inside, my palms damp, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I slid into a corner booth, keeping my head low. From where I sat, I had a clear view of him and the woman. She was younger than Claire, maybe early 30s, with long blonde hair and a nervous laugh that filled the room. She looked at him with adoration, the way I once had. My hands shook as I watched. I wanted to storm over, scream, demand answers. But I stayed still, waiting. When they left, I trailed them back to a quiet suburban neighborhood. I parked at the end of the street, watching them walk into a modest 2-story home. My chest tightened. Was this where he lived now? I sat there until the lights inside flickered on, then off. Finally, I stepped out of the car, each step heavy, deliberate. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. It swung open within seconds. The blonde woman stood there, smiling politely at first, but when her eyes landed on me, her entire face drained of color. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure horror. She screamed. The sound was sharp, piercing, almost animalistic. She stumbled back, her hands flying to her mouth, her body trembling as if she had seen a ghost. I froze in the doorway, my breath caught in my chest. Why was she reacting like this? I wasn't yelling, I wasn't threatening, I hadn't even spoken yet. But the way she looked at me, the terror in her eyes, it was as if my very presence had shattered her reality. Behind her, Daniel appeared, his face twisting in shock when he saw me. "Anna!" His voice cracked, the confidence I'd seen at the restaurant gone in an instant. The woman kept screaming, backing into the living room until she tripped over the edge of a rug and collapsed onto the couch. She shook her head violently, pointing at me with wide, terrified eyes. Daniel rushed to her side, trying to calm her, but she clutched his arm and cried out, "You told me she was dead." The room tilted. My knees nearly buckled. Dead. He had told her I was dead. I stepped forward, my voice trembling with rage. "What did you just say?" The woman shook, tears streaming down her face. He said you were gone. That you died in an accident last year. He swore you were buried. I saw the obituary. My head spun. I looked at Daniel, who was pale, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find words. For once, he had no smooth excuse, no clever lie. "You let her believe I was dead." My voice was raw, breaking with fury. "You buried me in your lies, Daniel." The woman sobbed harder, pushing him away. "You lied to me. You lied about everything." I could barely stand still. My heart raced so violently I thought I'd collapse. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was erasure. He hadn't only left me. He had rewritten me out of existence. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, desperate. "Anna, please, I can explain." "Explain?" I cut him off, my voice sharp. "You abandoned me in a hospital bed, you built another life, and you told this poor woman I was dead. Tell me, Daniel, how do you explain that?" His face contorted with guilt, anger, fear, emotions flashing too fast to read. He reached for me, but I stepped back. The woman stood, still trembling. "Get out," she whispered to him, her voice shaking but firm. "Get out of my house. Now." He stared at her, stunned. "What?" "No, sweetheart, please. Don't call me that," she screamed, her voice breaking. "You made me believe I was the only one. You made me grieve for someone who was standing right here all along. I don't even know who you are anymore." Daniel's shoulders sagged, his mouth falling open, but no words came. I turned toward the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the knob. Before leaving, I glanced back. The woman stood there, arms wrapped around herself, sobbing. Daniel was on his knees, begging, but his words were muffled by her cries. The scream that had cut through the house still rang in my ears. It had been more than shock, it had been truth breaking through lies. That scream revealed the depth of Daniel's deception in a way nothing else could. As I stepped outside, the night air hit my face, cool and sharp. I gulped it down, steadying myself. For the first time, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt powerful. His lies were crumbling around him, exposed for everyone to see. And I hadn't had to raise my voice once. Walking back to my car, I realized something. Daniel's world wasn't just collapsing. He had built it on facades so fragile that all it took was my presence, a single moment of truth, for it to shatter. And that scream, it didn't just change everything for him. It changed everything for me. The night air was sharp, almost electric, as I pulled the car door shut behind me. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, but not from fear anymore. It was something else, release, maybe, or the raw current of power rushing through me. The scream still echoed faintly in my ears, not as a haunting sound, but as a reminder, his lies were over. I sat there for a long moment, watching the house from a distance. Through the window, I could see fragments of chaos, Daniel pacing, his hands flailing in desperate gestures, while the blonde woman sat hunched on the couch, her shoulders shaking as if her sobs might never end. I thought I'd feel pity. I thought I'd feel guilt for dragging another innocent into Daniel's storm. But I didn't. Instead, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, clarity. This wasn't my storm anymore. I turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from the curb, the streetlights blurring into streaks of gold. With every mile I put between myself and that house, I could feel the weight peeling off my chest. 4 years, I had been the shadow in Daniel's world, the discarded wife, the forgotten truth, the erased memory. But not tonight. Tonight, I had walked straight into his carefully constructed fantasy and shattered it without raising my voice. Still, the question lingered as I drove through the quiet streets. What now? I could go to court. I could drag his name through the mud, expose every lie, every betrayal. But as I sat at a red light, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the windshield, I realized something. Revenge wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to keep him tethered to my life in any form, not through battles, not through gossip, not through paperwork. What I wanted was simpler, cleaner. I wanted freedom. By the time I reached my apartment, the decision had settled in me like a stone dropping into water. I wasn't going to let Daniel write another chapter in my story. I would end it myself, on my own terms. Inside, the silence greeted me like an old friend. For once, it wasn't suffocating. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. My phone buzzed on the table. His name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. By the fifth call, I picked it up, not out of curiosity, but because I wanted to hear his panic one last time. "Anna," he said, his voice strained, frantic. "Please, listen. It's not what it looks like." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Daniel, it's exactly what it looks like. And worse." No, you don't understand. I didn't mean to. Erase me." I cut him off, my tone sharper than I intended. "Pretend I was dead so you could play house? Which part am I misunderstanding?" He stammered, his words tripping over each other, but I didn't care anymore. His explanations no longer held power over me. "You know what, Daniel?" I said finally, my voice calm, almost steady. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to twist this into another story. Not this time." I ended the call. His name lit up my screen twice more before I powered off the phone. For the first time in years, I chose silence over his chaos. The next morning, I woke up lighter. The sunlight streaming through my window felt different, warm, forgiving. I brewed coffee, sat at the table with my journal, and for the first time in a long time, wrote without hesitation. I wrote about the scream, the look on that woman's face, the shock in Daniel's eyes. I wrote about how betrayal had stripped me down to nothing, but also how it had forced me to rebuild. Each word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Later that week, I made small changes, subtle but symbolic. I boxed up the last of the wedding photos I had never brought myself to throw away. I donated the dress I once thought I'd treasure forever. I even changed the locks on my apartment door, though Daniel hadn't had a key in months. Each action was quiet, almost mundane, but together they felt monumental. One evening, as I carried the last box of old memories down to the recycling bin, a neighbor I barely knew held the door for me. "Big clean out?" she asked kindly. I smiled, surprising myself. "Yeah," I said. "It's time." And it really was. Of course, there were moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, when the world was still, I sometimes wondered if walking away without a dramatic confrontation or legal battle meant he had won. But then I remembered the look on his face when the scream ripped through that house, the way his world crumbled in front of me without me lifting a finger. He hadn't won. He had lost the moment he tried to bury me. Weeks passed, and his attempts to reach me dwindled. The emails slowed, the calls stopped. It was as if he had finally realized I wasn't coming back, not as his wife, not as his victim, not as anything. One Saturday morning, I took a long walk through the city. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. Families bustled past, children laughed in the park, and for once, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt present. Alive. I sat on a bench, sipping coffee, watching life unfold around me. A thought crossed my mind, simple but profound: I don't need to be remembered by him. I need to remember myself. And so I did. That day, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let betrayal define me. I wouldn't let lies anchor me to a past that no longer existed. My life was mine to shape, mine to live, mine to reclaim. Walking away hadn't been about weakness. It had been about strength, the kind that doesn't need witnesses or applause. The kind that burns quietly, steadily, until it lights up the path forward. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, I stood from the bench and breathed in deeply. I wasn't Daniel's wife anymore. I wasn't his victim. I wasn't his ghost. I was simply me. And I was finally free.